So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 19th edition of our Banking Sector Report launch. I have the rare privilege of moderating this extremely rich panel of distinguished Nigerians. And I will take the proceedings in sequence as they are seated. So, starting with you, Mr. Sarumi, thank you for honoring us with your presence. We're discussing the recapitalization of the banking sector as a catalyst for a $1 trillion economy. And in discussing this, we cannot but discuss agriculture, given its significant contributions to GDP. I'll delve straight to the question. In the last 8 years, or 9 as it were, we've seen significant backward integration facilitated by the federal government and the central bank, in order to, as it were, improve food security. Given all of the investments that have happened, including such things as the Anchor Borrowers Program, the question is, we haven't seen food supply at the desirable levels, and if anything at all, agriculture output, from a GDP perspective has been weak. What do you think perhaps is missing in this equation? And the follow-on question then will be, given your extensive play in the domestic African and of course Nigerian markets, agriculture-wise, what are the pragmatic steps you think we need to take in order to de-risk agriculture and incentivize greater private sector participation?
Thank you, Victor. Several things are at play. The extensive work and policies in the last 9 years has actually helped agriculture. However, we've had these huge macroeconomic headwinds that seem to have changed the dynamics of the economy, because we have seen several key crops where we have increased productivity and production. However, events of the last 3 or 4 years is not helped matters. The high inflation, so we have food is hugely affected, imbalance in the exchange rate. Until very recently, we've seen a whole lot of food produced in Nigeria going to neighboring countries. So those policies actually were gaining momentum. They also have their drawbacks, I must say. However, where we are today, we can't have a $1 trillion economy without having excess agricultural output. Excess agricultural output will lead to sustained industrialization, and sustained industrialization will lead to growth in GDP, massive employment, and be able to counter several of the indicators that are not looking positive at the moment. I think in the last 50 years, the government has largely driven agriculture, and the government is still trying to do that. However, we're also working with government to get government to realize its limitation in being the driver of the change narrative in the agriculture sector. And I think the current government we have, they're listening. However, the events of insecurity, high inflation, and the urban poor that are mostly food insecure at the moment is making government jump back into the fray, which is like taking us back. But we are still working with them in ensuring that this is done within a short term, so that the private sector could bring private capital, could bring innovation to be able to drive agricultural output around crops that we have comparative advantages in, and deliver food security, excess agri output, and sustain industrialization. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Taiwo, You're next. You've left your role as a partner at PwC to go work for Nigeria. You're leading the Fiscal Policy and Tax Reform Committee, and I recall being at the presentation at the Ikeja Sheraton when you presented the summary of the work you've been doing over the last year plus. A lot of work, I must say. While thanking you for the work you've done, we understand that the need for reforms are critical to fixing the economy, some of the problems that Rasheed has very eloquently articulated. Given your experience so far leading this effort, what would you say are the main objectives for the tax reforms that your committee is championing today? And when we look across Africa, for example, and look at the sort of tax indices we see, are we able to learn lessons from some of these peer countries? If so, what are they?
Thank you very much, and thank you to Afrinvest for inviting me, and also for this very commendable project that you have done now for many years, and particularly the topic of this particular event. Let me start by saying that you're right, it's a lot of work that my committee has been doing. But I also have to put a disclaimer. So a number of things are attributed to my committee, which are not from my committee. The way you know if something is coming from my committee is we always share in advance. So we don't do anything that we haven't discussed with the people. We don't, as part of the learning from other environments, is that you cannot do fiscal policy and tax reform by doing surprises. Because you need a lot of data, you need evidence, you need consultation, and that's the only way your reforms can be enduring and your aspirations can then be accomplished. So I thought it's important to put that on the table. Having said that, so the work of my committee has three broad mandates. One is fiscal governance. Looking at how we manage our finances, our spending, our borrowing, the priority of spending, the efficiency of spending, and how we ensure coordination not only within the federal government but across subnational. And then respect for fiscal thresholds and consequences when they're not respected. The second one is revenue transformation. Nigeria is a poor country, even though many Nigerians don't like to hear that. The entire budget, including the supplementary, including all the 36 states, including all the 774 local governments, is under $40 billion. In fact, before the supplementary, this is not the revenue, this is the budget. The revenue is less than half of that amount. Kenya is $32 billion. South Africa is $130 billion. So it's a poor country, so which means while we are addressing all the issues around corruption, wasteful spending, inefficiency, we also have to recognize that there's a fundamental issue that we need to get the economy to work so that revenue can go up. The data we have seen has suggested to us that we are focusing our efforts around revenue generation in the wrong places, mostly at the bottom of the ladder, or we are taxing seed. For you to get a $1 trillion economy, you need the banking sector to thrive. You need the capital market to work. The banking sector is trying to recapitalize. They also need the capital market themselves. And the capital market needs the economy and policies to work in a consistent manner. So for us, revenue transformation is actually about looking at the tax system and saying, can we reconfigure it so that the burden of tax falls in the right places, not on the lower end of the ladder, including very small businesses. Beyond that, we also have identified that we can actually make more money from sweating government assets. Today, they are spread all over the place, they are not well managed, and some of them, people are taking advantage of that to enrich themselves. at the expense of the country. There's also the one around government-owned enterprises. So why is NNPC today not a global company earning Nigeria $20, $30 billion a year? There's really no reason why we're not at that level, and that's just one entity. And also we have the solid mineral and other natural resources. So we have these four important components to our revenue transformation journey. We are convinced that if we do the right thing, and they're not rocket science, that we can actually increase Nigeria's revenue to GDP ratio to up to 30% within the next 2 to 3 years. So the third and last component of our work is economic growth facilitation and competitiveness. And now this is the component of our work that recognizes the fact that if you have a poor country, it doesn't matter how well-intentioned you want to raise your revenue. People cannot give what they don't have. The best way to generate revenue in a sustainable manner is to promote prosperity for households, for firms, whether they are multinationals, whether they are local companies. And therefore, one of the philosophies we've set out to accomplish is that we will stop taxing capital. We will not tax investment. We will not tax production. Of course, we will not tax poverty. No country in the world has become wealthy by taxing poverty. It's a contradiction in itself. And above all, we will not tax seed. We will wait and invest with the Nigerian people and share the prosperity by way of the fruits when those investments begin to yield returns. So broadly, that's what we have seen. And we also are trying to harmonize taxes. I'll stop after this point because if you allow me, I'll spend all the time you have for the panel. We're trying to harmonize taxes. Today, we have over 60 official levies and taxes that people have to pay. Unofficially, it's more than 200, and I say this with all sense of responsibility, more than 200. Yet, South Africa, in their last fiscal year, collected from just one tax, personal income tax, more than 2 times what we collected from all taxes in Nigeria combined across all levels of government. Even Kenya collected almost 4 times what we collected in personal income tax in Nigeria. Kenya is 54 million people, equally poor. And customs, the value of imports in Kenya last fiscal year was $23 billion. Value of imports in Nigeria, $66 billion. Guess what? Kenya collected 3 times what we collected in import duties. So what that means is Nigeria should actually collect 9 times what we are collecting now, just from import duties. So there's a lot of room for improvements, and I know that with this improvement and the overall fiscal reform, we should be on our way to the $1 trillion economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. That was very insightful. Dr. Joe, we come to you. Or should I call you Ezemo? Your popular Twitter Monica. Nigeria is not new to economic plans or very ambitious statements. We've had several vision statements, Vision 2010, Vision 2020, 20, and all of that. Now the latest is this $1 trillion by 2032. So the questions are, how realistic is this $1 trillion target? And if realistic, what are the critical sectors you think would help us actualize or realize this very ambitious target?
Thank you. I'm very pleased that you didn't say the usual thing, which is Nigeria has beautiful plans. Implementation is the problem. Nothing is further from the truth. We are very, very poor at planning. And for that reason, we cannot implement. You can't implement what you haven't planned well. And that's the problem we have with implementation. It's not as if there's anything wrong in our implementation capacity. You know, if you ask us to implement corruption, we do it excellently well. So that we don't have a problem with implementation. The problem we have is with the way we plan and the way we prepare to do things. And so a lot of the plans we put together are, if you like, statements of hope. That's all they are. They are statements of hope. If you look at the economic recovery plan we had in the last administration, just following the recession, we produced the implementation plan 1 year after we developed the plan. And the plan was supposed to last 18 months. So is it any surprise that you then have issues with it? So we've been quite poor at planning, actually. So if we're aiming towards a 1 trillion economy, it's not just about stating it or writing a plan with pictures. There are certain changes in behavior that are needed. I'll give you a few examples. The richest black man on earth found out what has always been known on the streets, that after God, now government. He found out recently in just trying to get a refinery going that will energize the economy. You can see how very easy it is for a lowly government official to actually put a major block into a government's or a country's efforts at improving its finances. But think about it the other way around. Think about how much more impactful it could be if governments could drive improvements in the economy in a positive way rather than in a negative way. If you go to some countries, you go to countries like Barbados, even the taxi driver that picks you up from the airport will tell you, welcome to our beautiful island. That is not done out of the goodness of the heart of the taxi driver. It is the Ministry of Tourism that has inculcated this in everybody, because that is the competitive advantage they have, the tourism and people visiting their island. So just think about how much more government could do to help to boost the economy by not negatively trying to constrain development and growth in the economy. The second thing is what my brother Taiwo said. He was trying to talk about how you would know when things come from his committee. And he says they always release things in advance. I think I'm among bankers here. And many of my banker friends tell me that this is not the case when it comes to our central bank. A number of things take people by surprise. People just wake up and develop a policy, announce it without any consultation, without any plans as to how to deliver it. And the cash confiscation policy of 2023, many of us still remember with a lot of pain. I still get quite angry when I see those faded so-called new notes that are actually looking a lot older than the old ones. Then you need to think about the issues of productivity. How productive are you as a country? And you look at rates of productivity in Nigeria is actually quite low. But we're not even talking about the rate of productivity of the economy itself. We're talking about the rate of productivity of the individual Nigerian. How many files is the civil servant treating per day? How many persons, how many people are the cashiers in the banks attending to per day? How many patients is the doctor seeing on a daily basis? We don't even measure all of these things. Whereas in many developed economies, these are actually the things that will form the basis of performance management, whether you're actually delivering or not, because without a productive economy, it's really, really difficult to build wealth. Then you have short-termism. A number of our banks here will only lend you money for a short amount of time with a high level of interest. I would actually prefer to lend money to people who already have, rather than those who are just trying to get onto the ladder to build their company and build their economies. All of these things are the kinds of things that we need to reflect on if we're serious about building a 1 trillion dollar economy. And we need to be deliberate about it. It's not just about writing a so-called beautiful plan without any implementation capacity, without any thought about changes in legislation that are needed, changes in culture that are needed, changes in incentives that are needed. People don't just wake up and make announcements and then they are surprised that it hasn't happened. That is not the way to plan. And we need to get much, much better than we have been at making our plans.
Thank you very much. So Chinua, I come to you. Infrastructure is said to be a significant enabler for economic growth and inclusion in terms of development. The National Integrated Infrastructure Master Plan estimates the infrastructure gap at about $100 billion a year. And over the next 23 years, that figure is at $2.3 trillion, to underscore the currency. In your view, given the work you do at InfraCredit, what are the key infrastructure that you think, or should I say recommend, that become the priority focus areas in order to unlock that value that we so often talk about within the context of our resource shortages? And as a follow-on to that, what would be the optimum financing model that Nigeria should, through government, adopt in order to ensure that we can address this gap in a sustainable manner that obviously brings the private sector on board very willingly?
Thank you, Victor. Thank you for inviting me to this event. It's a pleasure to be here. So I think I'll start by just setting a context for the role I play with InfraCredit. We were set up to address a market gap in 2016, 2017, essentially to provide guarantees, credit enhancement to attract long-term finance in local currency from our domestic pension funds and other institutional investors, essentially drive domestic resources to unlock financing for development, private sector-led infrastructure. But this depended on the capital markets, and I'm really pleased that our DG is here. Welcome, Mr. DG. I think the capital market has a very important role to play when we think around the opportunity to leverage our domestic resources, deepen access to finance, and more importantly, drive inclusive infrastructure. Because it's, when we look at the definition of what infrastructure means, we need to situate it within the context of the country, where we have 93% of our labor force in the informal sector, thereabout up to 90%, where MSMEs constitute over 40% of the national GDP. We have to think about infrastructure that can drive inclusive growth. And that actually redefines the lens through which you look at growth. And over the past, I'll say 7 years of our existence, we've been able to show that, at least the data now shows that 20-year financing in local currency can be mobilized for infrastructure development to finance private sector. We can unlock private partnerships where we have government assets that are now optimized by private sector, raising financing for that from the capital markets. And so when we bring these funding models that now exist, essentially looking at pools of local funding, is estimated about $5 billion Naira equivalent of domestic credit can be mobilized from institutional pension funds and broadly more across other sectors if we look at the allocation that is available. But how do we make sure that the underlying assets that we originate and structure are bankable and, more importantly, can drive inclusive growth? And the sectors we've supported to date, and this reflects some of the very important sectors in the economy, is energy access. We all know the challenges we have. Nigeria has one of the highest energy deficits in the world, but that also creates an opportunity to look at innovative ways of enabling distributed energy access. And I think, the recent program that I believe will be announced, has been announced, but also will be launched, which is the Distributed Access Renewable Energy Program that the government is implementing through the Rural Electrification Agency. I think it's a World Bank funded $750 million program. I think that has significant impact in driving inclusive access for over 20 million Nigerians that don't have energy access. And this is looking at leveraging climate finance, leveraging new technologies to drive growth, domestic growth. And this cuts across the sectors of the economy when we look at creative ways to unlock financing. And I think, one of the opportunities that Africa should be taking advantage of, and specifically Nigeria, is the fact that, we, even though we contribute the least to climate change, we struggle with the biggest, impact. But that also creates a unique opportunity. Now, what we're seeing is the opportunity to look at climate adaptation projects, climate mitigation projects, such as funding climate smart agriculture, supporting energy access, green housing, that could unlock pools of trillions of dollars that is queuing, but looking for projects that align with their objectives. So again, this is really looking at the opportunity to look at blended funding models that allow us to reduce the cost of financing. One of the biggest challenges with the inflation and interest rate environment is that it's really difficult to borrow sustainably, but there are models where you can blend that cost and reduce the overall cost of financing. We've successfully seen models where development partners are willing to fund concessional funding to blend more expensive money, but because it's addressing climate goals, we've seen this in energy, we've seen this in green housing. So I think that these are models that can help to unlock critical sectors, even as we look at what we call transition, even though it's really thinking about how do we leverage new sources of capital to drive development and create jobs. And if you look at countries like India that have successfully been able to unlock electric buses and e-mobility, looking at 3 and even 2-wheelers, you'll be surprised that in Nigeria, transportation is probably 3 and 2-wheelers that actually, is more of the mobility for many. And there are innovative ways to reduce the cost of access for these technologies, but drive inclusive growth. So once we look at infra across the spectrum, the big infra projects, the big roads, the rail projects, we need to look at inclusive infrastructure that actually can drive sustained development. And so the opportunity does sit. One of the, I truly believe that the capital market presents that unique opportunity to unlock access to financing. We need to see more innovation in the rules. We're very confident that the current leadership is going to drive changes that we will see increase access to markets. One of the challenges we've had in the past is the delays it takes to access capital markets. But if we see changes in the rules that actually allow us to aggregate smaller projects, that ideally may not be able to access markets, and those can be de-risked, and you can access 10, 15, tenors of money that actually make projects more sustainable. It is a path to development. And the truth is that these are models that have been proven. So we're not really ideating around things that don't exist. We're really saying, look, we have proven models that we can leverage for growth. So indeed, there are challenges in the economy, but also these challenges create very unique opportunities. We do have unique tools as a country. Many African countries don't have the depth of capital markets that we enjoy in Nigeria. We could leverage that. We have a huge amount of carbon sink in the country in terms of forest reserves. We have the opportunity to leverage our energy transition to reduce cost of financing. And I believe that if we look at the key sectors across the economy, from transportation, energy access, telecoms, another key enablers that can drive access to capital for other sectors, these will be very critical for growth.
Thank you very much, Chinua. Mr. Okeke, very quickly, you are the power man, and clearly my questions will be around power. When we look at comparative economies that are at the $1 trillion GDP size scale, they typically generate about 2,000 kilowatt hours per capita. Nigeria is at 10% of that. That gap, which Chinua has touched on quite eloquently, is something that we need to bridge quickly. In your view, how can we as a country begin to pursue energy efficiency from the perspective of generation capacity, bearing in mind the challenges that now ensue on account of the reduction in purchasing power and the issues around disposable income. Is subsidy a valid conversation in that equation? If not, how do we solve it? There's also a question around our energy mix. Today, I think 99%, almost all of our energy is either hydro or thermal, which is gas. Shouldn't we as a country begin to look at our energy mix for diversification, leveraging what could be competitive advantages across the country, whether it be wind, solar, biomass, or whatever else, so that we enrich that supply mix and de-risk the sector?
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for your question. And I'm not going to take them sequentially. Let me start with the subsidy. Is subsidy a valid conversation? The answer is no. That's clear. No country or no industry progresses based on subsidy. And when we also talk of subsidy, it's not the way we do that in Nigeria, because the subsidy we do is basically market distorting subsidy. Rather, what you do is to allow the market to function, and if there are people who cannot play in the market, you now ask yourself, how do I support them to play in the market? Like when you go to something like the UK, you have something like means tested money that you give to low-income families. But you do not distort the market, because no company invests based where there is subsidy, because you're basically putting your fate in the hands of that government official who approves the subsidy. Then he doesn't approve it. Then what happens next? So subsidy is not an option. And then we go into the purchasing power of Nigerians. Yeah, we know it's reduced, but let's understand a simple fact. Power is not a cheap commodity. The problem with Nigeria is that for such a long time, we've been made to believe that it's a social product, that everybody should have it at the expense of government. In many countries, after housing cost, the next one is energy cost for every household. And because our tariff has been very low for such a long time, Nigeria has been the dumping ground for all energy inefficient products all over the world, appliances and everything. Why countries are now thinking of energy efficiencies in their homes? Because somebody else pays for the power. We don't really care. I mean, I think recently I went to Abah International Market, and it's kind of funny that you still see cathode ray tube TVs being imported in containers into Nigeria that people are mounted in their homes. Then I now go back in terms of the what we are discussing, which is 1 trillion economy, and that's the question I keep asking myself: are we ever going to be a 1 trillion economy without energy access? I doubt it, simply because one of the challenges, and I think recently when the commentary on Dangote and that kind of thing was being done, you kind of understand that as a manufacturing entity in Nigeria, your cost of production is 30 to 40% higher than counterparts in other countries. And that's principally because everybody in Nigeria is his own utility. The cheapest form of energy you can have is the grid energy. It's not that I have diesel generator at my home. It's never cheap. Now, when people don't really understand, because a lot of people really trust their generators, I think that the only reason people tend to go towards their generator is because of the reliability of supply. I know that when I want electricity, I tell my megad, I tell whoever, go and put it on. While the grid, it comes when you don't. And in so many countries, even when there is load shed, they tell you when you're going to be cut off. And I believe that even if Nigerians get just 4 hours a day, but they know reliably, when they are going to get that power, a lot of people will actually dispose of their generators. The problem today is that power can come when you need it, or when you don't need it, and then goes when you need it. So that's the thing, but ultimately, grid power is always the cheapest form of electricity. And whatever we do as a country, unfortunately, I think because of lack of plans, everything, I'm like when Chinua spoke, what I see now is more about distributed power all over. Even the World Bank is encouraging us. And I look at it because they've looked at the country, there is this failure of the grid that we are now saying, let's migrate people from being their individual utility, because everybody here is a utility. You generate your power, you transmit it, you distribute it. Because as long as you have a generator in your home, that's what you're doing. You buy the fuel, generate the electricity, the wire goes to your room, so you everything. So I think what Chinua and them are now trying to do is, can we probably aggregate it? So instead of everybody being a utility, can we say every street will now be a utility? But it's not cheap, it's not efficient. Grid power is still where to go. And how do we get there? Like I said again, it's about us understanding that we have to look at the electricity economically. For example, there are some parts of this country that you shouldn't have grid power connected to, because it's too expensive to extend power to them. There are some communities where you just have 4,000 people living, they don't really need anything. You extend grid, which is very expensive to them. Even in US, as it is, there are some areas where grid power is not connected. Rather, that area, you look at them, you can go and put a solar panel to just account for them. And when we talk of Africa, some of us rush to Ghana and everything. Most of these countries, they don't have reliable electricity, but they have reliable electricity in the key centers of production for the economy. So it's something I always say, that if I'm TCN, if I buy 100 transformers, 40, 50 of them should go to Lagos and Ogun axis, because that's where the load center is. Why should I send one transformer to Lagos and one to KB? Just because I'm trying to balance the country. And that's the biggest challenge, because we are not looking at power economically. The day we start looking at power economically, looking at the naira and kobo of it, okay, you produce power at this cost, somebody got to pay for it, and then all of a sudden you start saying, where is my market? Where do I put that power? For example, personally, based on the power we have on the grid today, I believe that probably we should just connect state capitals and disconnect every other person. And then when we connect just the state capitals, then they pay the right price. And that will now incentivize private companies. We've only had a plan for the power sector between 2010, call it the offshoot of the Electric Sector Reform Act. That was the only time we planned. And politicians in their right mind said, no, we cannot just give power to those able to pay, because as one of the senators told me, when you come to like Abuja, the people that pay live in Maitama, but the people that vote are in Nyanya. So we're not going to do that. We have to give everybody power. So government now said, okay, how do we do it? We now said, let's create this body called NBET. And we as government, we guarantee it for them to encourage private sector to come in, because Nigeria does not have enough money to generate the power that we need. So we created NBET, and that was how my company Azura came about, and rightfully for Azura promoters, they said, yeah, Nigeria, you've told me all these things, but I don't trust you. So they got World Bank to also stand above Nigeria to say, we will guarantee this power plant. And then Azura now came. If you check the press in the last 7 years, 8 years, the only thing you hear is, we don't like this Azura. If not for this World Bank PLG on this company, we wouldn't pay. But investors, please come. We need power. But this one that is there, if not for World Bank, we are not going to pay. But I will pay you without guarantee. Just come and invest. That's why nobody's investing. And what we've seen is that in the last 7 years, we've been at 4,000 megawatts. And if nothing is done, in the next 8 years, we are still going to be at 4,000 megawatts, even as the population is increasing. Sorry, I'm taking your time. And then when you go to energy mix, yes, renewable energy is good. I am one, I advocate it, because when you think of climate change today, we in Africa, we suffer the most. But we have to have a reliable grid before you start thinking of all those bells and whistles. I mean, look at Europe today, they're opening up coal power plants. We have coal that you can pick up in Kogi State. We have coal that you can pick up. We have gas, we have all those things. You know, I like renewable, I like all those things, but we have to have a reliable grid based on the gas that we are flaring in Niger Delta. We have to get those things to work first of all, and then before we now start thinking, how do we embellish it? Renewable is also getting cheaper, don't get me wrong. But ultimately, the battery technology is not yet there for us to reliably rely on, say, the wind or the solar. So we still have to get those basic fossil fuel electricity to our homes and make it reliable for Nigerians. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. We have Mr. Jude Chiemeka online, the MD of the NGX. I think
yes, I'm here.
Excellent. You know, so this plays into your field very well. The recapitalization, obviously, is something that is now very well within your crosshairs, considering that a good number of banks are listed. What role has the NGX played or plans to play to enable the realization of these very lofty targets for banks? And how do you anticipate that this would impact the capital markets, especially considering the role technology plays today as a tool to democratize access?
All right, thank you, and a very warm good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, my DG. And first, let me thank Afrinvest for inviting NGX to this event. I think it's very apt, and it really speaks to what is going on. In the larger scale of things, it makes the economy more functional if we have bigger banks. So it's a good thing that we're doing this recapitalization. But to your point, your question specifically, in terms of what the NGX is doing, we've worked tirelessly, have made significant investments in digital technology required for distribution. And I must say a huge thank you to the SEC, the DG, for their commitment and in making sure that the digital platform was approved, which is now being deployed by the banks in raising capital for two reasons. One, it will help improve the whole process and the speed of participation by participants or retail investors in the market. Two, it will also help reduce the costs of issuance for the overall benefit of investors and from an issuer's perspective, because the time to conclude an offer will be far more less than it will typically take when you're using paper. But it will also help address a fundamental issue in terms of investing in Nigeria, where investors are left without being able to claim their dividend. So you have this unclaimed dividend issue lingering in the markets. With digital offering, that eliminates the whole process, because the whole process of investing is linked to your account, bank account, and you can invest and your dividend will pay subsequently into that account. But it's the speed really of investing. For less than 2 minutes, you can actually invest just using your mobile app based on the technology platform that the NGS has provided. This is very instrumental to our market, given what happened the last time, especially with the banking consolidation, where we did see a lot of retail investors coming into the market, but obviously because of the volatility that they did experience, a lot of them were badly hurt. Some of them went in without proper advice. So we think that with this digital app, they will have access to their brokers, and their brokers will be able to advise appropriately in terms of how they invest. But beyond that, from an NGS perspective, we're also looking at products that we believe will be useful for these retail investors to be able to de-risk their participation in the equities market. Because investing in an equities market obviously comes with its risk, but investors need to have access to instruments that will allow them to de-risk. And we have created the derivatives market. The derivatives market is obviously an instrument that will allow investors to de-risk their play in the market. And I would think that this is a different approach from what happened the last time. Now, specifically, how will the digital offering assist the market in terms of the number of investors that will participate in the market? Today, we do not have significant retail investors in our market, but we believe that with this digital app, we'll be able to reach a lot more investors, and we'll see a lot more retail investor participation in our market. And it goes far wide, not just the city centers, but across all the various segments of the economy. And we believe that products can be developed on the back of this app. So it's not just the distribution of the offers alone, but it also helps retail investor participation in our market. You can recall the last time MTN had their digital offering, we had 150,000 new retail investors join the market. So we think that with this whole digital assistance, we would certainly have a larger number of investors. The number typically is around 3 to 4 million retail investors. For a population of our size, we think that this app will really help address that issue. So we're anticipating significant participation from the retail investor side, and also from the products we have curated, they should be able to manage their risk appropriately. In terms of the overall implication for the market, so today we trade $6 million a day, which is really significantly small given the size of our economy. The equities market GDP is about $35 billion. That we believe, post this recapitalization, we will certainly see a lot more companies listing. So it won't just be the banks recapitalizing, but we believe that this whole activity will bring in more corporates to list, and we're working on revamping the rules. And I believe that the new DG is committed to that whole process to really improve the rules around listing, to encourage more listings. So we think that on the back of this recapitalization by the banks, we'll see more companies list. Today, we've traded close to $951 million in terms of secondary market trading. And so it also speaks to the fact that the people who are investing now will have access to a very solid secondary market. So when they do invest and they require to sell their shares, they will be able to do so in a seamless manner. And so that's how we are looking at it. And we believe that with the cooperation of the SEC, and they have been very helpful, the market is really in for a good time. And so we believe that listed companies pay more taxes, and government is talking about a $1 trillion economy. Our market cap to GDP is less than 20%. And I think given the size of our economy, it should be a lot more. So we expect more listings. And what that will do for the government is more taxes. For instance, just five big corporates last year paid over 362 billion naira as taxes to the government, which means with more companies being listed, government will have more taxes because listed companies are generally more tax compliant. So the idea here is really to push for more listings, for government to be able to raise more money, more listings to be able to boost our market cap to GDP, and that will really lead to a more functional market, and at the end of the day, allow investors access to various types of products that they will also utilize in savings and growing their wealth accordingly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jude. We take questions from the audience. I was going to perhaps open the mic and ask if there are any maybe final shots, 30 seconds to 1 minute from the panelists here in parting, given what we've heard from the central bank. Any takers? We might as well then start from the audience. So let's open the floor for questions.
Okay, we're now at the questions and answers session. If you have questions, we would have the ushers going around with microphones. Please indicate. You can state where your name, of course, and your organization before asking your questions. Thank you. So if you have any questions, please indicate, and the ushers will bring the microphone to you.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Samuel Oyekemi. I lead research for Noren Bedra Financial Group. Thank you very much, panelists, for your comments and contribution. I wanted to, I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but it's quite a number of them. So one of the things I think is affecting the Nigerian economy across different sectors is the lack of reliable, structured data. Because, so for example, when you look at indices from the NBS, talk about inflation, census, even the GDP metrics, their data is collected maybe probably 15 years ago, and we expect at some form of restructuring those methodologies, but that has not happened. And that also finds a way to affect many other things in the economy. So for example, we're talking about financial inclusion in Nigeria. The CBN has hiked interest rate by about 800 basis points already this year. Rather, we still have money supply surging at records high. Inflation remain unabated. And this cannot happen, even if we understand that some of the inflation in Nigeria, for example, might be cost push rather than demand pull. But a situation whereby you don't have a lot of Nigerians being captured in the financial system, many of these monetary policies would not be effective as much as you want. Then again, you look at our GDP composition, look at major sectors in the economy, and then you see that they are the laggards when you compare them to other sectors of the economy. So you look at the likes of trades, where you expect a lot of creation of employment, but rather trade grows at a marginal rate of 1 or 2%. Talk about agriculture contributing about 21% to the economy, but then in terms of growth is also growing less than 2%, and many of other major economies as we see them. But then the economies that are driving growth are not as much large. Talk about banking, rail, transportation. What policies can be directed at these sectors to bring them to a portion whereby as much as they are driving growth, they also have the width to drive it across board? Thank you.
Thank you for landing. I was going to ask you what the question was. So I guess between Dr. Joe and maybe Taiwo, we can attempt to answer this question. So Taiwo, perhaps you go first, please.
Thank you very much for that question. And that question, in my view, goes to the heart of policy formulation in Nigeria, and that is using data. Sometimes I would say that when you talk about inclusion in making decisions, it's not just about the different people you have around the table. The most important item that must be on that table is data. More often than not, we don't have the data. Sometimes we have data that you cannot take to the bank, and sometimes you have data that is manipulated because someone has an endpoint in mind. So whether you're talking about transportation, whether it's agri, whether it's monetary policy, whether it's fiscal policy, whether it's trade, if we just begin to use data, in my view, we'll solve more than half of our problems. And sometimes, even the private sector are guilty. So you see in the lead up to the last, MPC, for example, you see a lot of analysts say we expect 100% basis point increase, 150%. And I keep asking myself, do these people live in a different world? You look at the component, look at the CPI basket, right? 52% of the inflation is food. Next, you have housing and utility. Then you have transportation. I keep saying to myself, which of these items would raising interest rates moderate the price, right? So from the fiscal side as well, you have the windfall tax on banks. The same banks are the capital market trying to recapitalize. I saw a report just yesterday showing that some of the banks, the amount at which they offer their shares for public offer and right issue is now more than the price in the market. So we're not, and I agree with Dr. Abah, we are terrible with planning. Because planning also means you have to play out different scenarios. And say, if I do this, what will happen to this? And there has to be system thinking. You cannot just say, you don't own anything. because you are managing one area of regulation, you just operate on your own, and then you create problem for other players. The exporters are complaining now because one agency decided they have to give them some certification that they don't need anywhere. And if you export without getting that, you go to jail. How do you run a country like that? This is not supported by data. Just this morning on Channel TV, there was a conversation about the manufacturers who produce alcohol and wines or spirit, I don't know what they call it. And one regulator decided, you know what, you can't produce small sachet because, you know, children have access to it, so they don't have access to the big one. What kind of analysis led to that decision making? We already find ourselves in a difficult situation. The worst thing we should be doing is making it even worse. So I agree with you, let's use data more, both in the public sector and in the private sector, and those of us who are public analysts, please don't go and say things you are not sure about. You may be adding to our problems. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Dr. Abah, please. I would like to hear your contribution.
I think Taiwo has essentially covered it, and when we talk about planning, we don't mean writing a document. You know, like Taiwo said, it's thinking through all of the scenarios and having contingency plans for what could happen when that scenario comes in. I have nothing against the central bank. I'm very, very enthusiastic about the new regime, because the old regime, virtually anything would have been better. But I'm quite enthusiastic about the new regime, because how do you, in the old regime, plan to change a currency and then you're surprised that you can't produce enough currency to satisfy people's needs? I worry when you're giving 25 banks or so, I don't know how many banks we have now, 2 years to recapitalize up to a particular amount. It takes some time to actually get to the market, okay, to prepare yourself to offer your shares for sale. It takes some time. You're asking everybody, all the banks, to do it at the same time, in the same economy that is currently struggling. You're announcing that, oh, and by the way, if you can't meet it up as a national bank, you can become a regional bank. After you've told everybody to establish branches in all the states. These are the kinds of things we do. And it comes from a certain arrogance in the way that we govern that doesn't think about the effects of the policies we make on people. And of course, the banks are scared to death of the central bank, so it's only someone like me that can say it. That is the problem. So it's not, planning is not giving you 2 years notice that you need to recapitalize. Planning is working with you through it and thinking, okay, if we make this policy, what effect will it have on our economy? What effect will it have on the banks themselves? What are the banks' own ideas about how we could do this? What about time frame? What is reasonable in terms of time frame? How do we mitigate job losses that come out of possible mergers, or people who simply cannot raise the funds? What do we do? That is the kind of planning, and I think that we should have. And we do that with credible data. And the kind of data that guides your thinking, not only the kind of data that you like. Because having data is one thing, actually using the data is another, because our politicians are very adept at actually ignoring the data and acting regardless of what the data says. So yes, we need to collect more data, but we also need to have a lot more discipline about how we use data. And I think public servants need to be a lot more, it needs to be possible to hold public servants accountable. when you do things like the pain that you caused with the cash confiscation, there should be consequences for that. When you get an Ethiopian airline plane and you paint it with Nigerian colors, you know, come and spray water on it at Abuja Airport, there should be consequences for things like that. Unfortunately, there are no consequences for being bad at your job in Nigeria.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? We'll have time for one more. Is there a hand? Okay, I see a hand.
Thank you very much. So I have a couple of concerns, but I want to speak to just one. My name is Kenneth Ate from Truck Transit Park Limited. Growing a 1 trillion economy is a plus for all Nigerians if that is actually actualized. But there is a concern that investors have had over the years, which I want to bring to the fore and want to find out what we are doing to forestall its reoccurrence. Sometimes in 2022, in the stock market, we had about 190 to 198 companies listed on the stock exchange. And these are companies whom investors have carried in their funds, invested as micro, small, or large investors. Currently, we have about 170 companies listed in the exchange, if I'm not mistaken. Over 20 are no longer there. And investors who invested in this company have lost their funds. What are we doing to forestall these incidents from happening with the current pace of regulation that is going to come from the banks, which other sectors may have to follow suit, so that we don't have a repeat of people coming in, bringing their funds, both local and foreign investors, and at the end of the day, the funds going under. So what are we doing to forestall its reoccurrence, please?
Okay, thank you. I reckon this question would probably go to Jude. Mr. Chiemeka, are you able to take this?
All right. Thank you very much for that. I do believe it's very apt, given what is going on now. But let me just correct an impression. So the stock exchange is a platform where issuers come to raise capital, and those companies are regulated in terms of the issuance process by the Securities and Exchange Commission, the apex regulator of the capital market. From our own standpoint, we see companies come to list, and we also see companies delist, which is not peculiar to Nigeria. It's a global phenomenon. Companies have the right to list and the right to delist. But what is important is that the shareholders, minority shareholders, are taken care of. And that is also enshrined within the rules of engagement. There's a pre-listing requirement, and there's also a post-listing requirement, which takes care of all the stakeholders, including the minority shareholders. So the listing does not automatically mean that you have lost your investment in the company, because some of these companies delist to become private companies, and the whole process of settlement of the minority stakeholders enshrined within the rules of engagement, which typically happens. Some of them even delist and they go to NASD. So it's important to bear in mind that when companies delist, it's not an automatic loss of your investment. It's just to follow and ensure that the process that they have followed in delisting, the companies are following the rules, and the stakeholders or the minority stakeholders will be and should be well taken care of. I've even seen instances where SEC was very adamant on the minority stakeholders being taken care of, and in that process, even the intent of the companies to delist, it cannot be crystallized if the minority stakeholders are not properly provided for as enshrined in the post and listing requirements. So in summary, the exchange is very mindful of the listing processes, and we will continue to work, obviously, with the cooperation of the SEC to ensure that the investors who invest in our market are well taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chiemeka. I think with that, we've come to the end of this panel session. It has been a privilege to moderate this, and I believe that the conversations that have happened here have been insightful in many respects, and hopefully serve as a credible platform for the next phase of this event, which is the actual presentation of the banking report, I would assume. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Another round of applause for our panelists. We'd like to thank you, Mr. Rasheed Sarumi, Managing Director, Saro Africa International. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, Chairman, Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Dr. Joe Abah, Nigeria Country Director, Development Alternatives Incorporation. Thank you, Mr. Chinua Azubike, Chief Executive Officer, InfraCredit. Thank you, Mr. Edu Okeke, Managing Director, Azura Power West Africa. And joining us online, Mr. Jude Chiemeka, CEO, Nigerian Exchange Limited. A round of applause for all of them once again.